Hello and welcome to SwitchScheme, where I do reviews, news, and lists. And everybody loves a list. So today, we're covering my top 7 SRPGs, specifically tactics games on the Nintendo Switch. Think Final Fantasy Tactics, if you will. If you enjoy the content, drop a like and subscribe. If there's a game I didn't mention, drop it in the comments down below. If this video does well enough, I can always do a follow-up since the list goes on beyond 7. But I felt that this was a good number to land on. Keep in mind, these games are in no particular order. So, let's get started. Now I know my channel is new at the time of writing this video script, but for those who are already here, you know, because I say it a lot, that survival horror is my favorite genre. Well, it's time to start digging into my other favorite genre, strategy RPGs and tactics type games. Thankfully, the Switch has a very large library of these wonderfully deep tactical experiences. The question is though, with so many to choose from, what are the top picks? Well, in truth, I couldn't list them all in one video. That would be an extreme length, so I decided to go with my top 7. And to start us off, we have... I played my Game Boy Advance so much that I basically destroyed it. Not from neglect, but from overuse. The system was my childhood, encapsulated into a small electronic portable device. A few of my favorite SRPGs at the time were Lord of the Rings: The Third Age, Fire Emblem, Final Fantasy Tactics Advance, and of course, the GOAT of tactics on that system, Advance Wars 1 and 2. I absolutely loved those games, and I was so excited once the reboot was announced for the Nintendo Switch. I legit yelled in excitement when it was shown as a teaser at the Nintendo Direct. Sadly, it was delayed due to real-world conflicts, but thankfully, it came out, and for me, it really delivered. The new graphics turned a lot of original fans off the reboot, to be fair, but I personally wasn't here for that. I was here for the gameplay, nostalgia, and the new music. The game is geared towards a teen-based audience with its cute cartoony graphics and the fact that the primary war tactician that we follow is a teenager named Andy. But the gameplay is deep, rich, and it offers hours upon hours of content. The story has you follow the Orange Star Army as they are invaded by the Blue Moon Army led by Olaf. Once you push the opposing armies out of your territory, the story starts to involve doppelgangers, maybe aliens, and an invading force bent on world domination. It's not the most depth that you'll find in a tactics game in terms of story, but the gameplay makes up for it. This, however, I believe is not what sells the game for most people. Besides the wonderful gameplay, I would think that it's the roster of characters. Each character has a unique personality and playstyle, and really pushes the depth of combat further to its limits. Sadly, the reboot is held back a lot by its limited online functionality and these graphical changes, but for me, this was one of the extremely few times that I actually pre-ordered a game, and I really hope we get a reboot of Dual Strike and Days of Ruin, but I don't think that's gonna happen. Can I just mention one more time how much I love the music in this game? For most of us, Final Fantasy Tactics was our first tactics game that we ever played. It pioneered the concept of this type of gameplay, and it was a huge hit for Square. To this day, many games in the genre are put upon the scale to see if it holds weight against the original, and for many, they fall short. But when one either tilts the scale in its favor, or at least balances it, it truly stands out. And Triangle Strategy aimed to be one of the few that tilts the scale onto its side. For many, it succeeded. It has a long, drawn-out story with branching storylines influenced partially by your choices and the votes of your company. The 2D, 3D graphics that Square has perfected by this point are always a beauty to look at, even if for some it is a bit too retro than necessary. The music is top of the line and to be expected by Square at this point, and the art style of the character images will make you instantly think of those PS1 classics. The characters are okay, and to be honest, for me they were a bit too cliche. I guess that's the best way to put it. They all had a stereotypical characteristic that you see in these type of games set in this time period. The story has 3 nations vying for control of their continent. A pretty standard template we'll see a little bit later, but it does it pretty well. I think the main thing that turned a lot of players away is just how long the story takes to really catch its stride. We're talking 15 to 20 hours. Before that, it's a lot, and I mean a lot of setup, character introductions, and exhibition dumps. For many, that is a tall task. But for those of us who stick it out and truly let ourselves immerse into this story, found a game that still, I say, doesn't quite surpass the greatness of Final Fantasy Tactics, really pushes itself closer than many of its contemporaries. The Fire Emblem series has an interesting history. It initially was a Japan-only release of games until they finally gave us Fire Emblem for the Game Boy Advance in 2003. To their surprise, it was a huge hit, and ever since, they've given us Fire Emblem games to satiate our appetite. On the Switch, we have two main options, Engage and Three Houses. Now I got through both, but I always find myself going back to Three Houses when I want to play a Fire Emblem game. I really enjoy the character and relationship building that occurs during your time in the game, and that aspect has always been the most enjoyable part to me. Obviously, the combat is a huge part of it, and it's one of my favorite parts of it, but the additional ability to build these close-knit relationships with your army really made it stand out. Fire Emblem Engage took out a large portion of this and returned back to a stronger emphasis on the combat-related storytelling. Don't get me wrong, Fire Emblem Engage is a fantastic game. It's just that when I'm in the mood to play Fire Emblem, I always find myself going back to Three Houses and playing through one of the campaigns. If you enjoy the after-school relationship building of, say, a Persona game, this game gives you a light version of that to go along with the excellent story and gameplay. Also, Yellow Deer for life. Valkyrie Chronicles 4 may be a slight cheat to throw it in on this list, but at the end of the day, to me, it is a tactics game. It just also blends third-person combat within. The debate among fans of this series is often misaligned on which game on the Switch is better, 1 or 4. For many, it's agreed that 1 has better characters and story, while 4 has more evolved gameplay. The biggest crime of this series, though, is that 2 and 3 still have not been updated or ported since I believe the PSP, due to low sales or no translations. However, taking what we can get gives us Valkyrie Chronicles 1 and 4. Specifically, I find 4 to be a little bit more enjoyable. It's a phenomenal game with hours of content, huge replayability, and a pretty decent story to go along with it. I do agree that Valkyrie Chronicles 1 handles the story and characters better, but I am of the opinion that the gameplay of Valkyrie Chronicles 4 is just slightly better. The thing that keeps it on my shelf is the depth of team building for the combat sessions. Each character has good or bad passives, and you spend a lot of your time and money upgrading and researching weapons, all of which, for the most part, differ in things such as damage, accuracy, range, or more. This truly leads you to being able to tailor your team to either your favorite playstyle, or tailor it to the most effective at the battle at hand. Another aspect of the game that really makes me love it is the art style. Everything looks like a watercolored painting, and for some, it's a little bit too anime, but I really enjoyed the look of it all. Honestly, you can't really go wrong with either Chronicles 1 or 4. I just personally find 4 to be a little bit more enjoyable, and it definitely deserves a spot on the SRPG section of your library. Mutant Year Zero is a game that I don't hear often talked about when it comes to tactics games, and that's fair. The game received middling reviews, and although it's not a bad game, it just didn't stand out. From what I know, it's based on a tabletop RPG of the same name from Sweden, which I thought was a pretty cool idea. I really enjoy games that use the D&D model to run its combat and storytelling, think Baldur's Gate, so I figured this would be a fun game for me. And it is. It's not as deep combat-wise as some of the others on the list, but it has such a great world to play in. The world building is phenomenal. The story takes place in a world ravaged by what's known as the Red Disease and nuclear fallout. Mutants now run the world, with humans all but extinct except for a few who are now insane by the disease or radiation. You play as 2 mutants on a journey to locate Eden, a mythical promised land of sanctuary and safety. The game's story will take you about 10 to 15 hours and has branching storylines, with a couple of new characters to meet and add to your party along the way. The characters all play different to each other due to passives and gun loadouts, but it's nothing new in the grand scheme of things. One of the big downsides for a lot of people is that the graphics had to be downgraded pretty heavily for it to run on Switch. But to be honest, we're all Switch owners, and I think by this point we're used to the downscaling that happens to ports, and we just learn to live with it. If you go ahead and give this game a try, it's going to give you a great narrative to follow. It is a lot of fun. Mario vs. Rabbids is one of those games that I don't think anyone saw coming. The crossover of Mario and Rabbids, but also Nintendo diving into the SRP genre using Mario to front it. The game ended up being a surprise hit for the SRPG fanbase, regardless of its childish humor and quirky story. When the sequel was announced, it was an exciting time. I know myself personally thought that this was going to be a one-and-done concept for Nintendo. A spin-off that may sell well or may not, but either way, they can now say that they have an SRPG for fans in their library. Well, thankfully, they're continuing the fun with the sequel, Sparks of Hope. It changes the combat from the usual tight restrictive controls of standard SRPGs when it comes to movement, like XCOM, and allows for that freedom of movement to occur in the battles at hand. This is a double-edged sword though. Although the freedom feels good, it also makes the game pretty easy. It makes the character's movement restrictions in the other SRPGs seem much more necessary when you see Sparks of Hope and how much it changes the dynamic of the combat. However, the game is a lot of fun, minus Beepo being one of the most annoying characters I've ever experienced since Paimon.
That's not true, and you know it!
The gameplay sees a lot of new puzzles and characters added to the game from its predecessor, and the visuals are exactly what you would expect from the whimsical world of Mario. The music, some of the best. If you want a more traditional SRPG, or maybe a little bit more challenge, I would say go with the original. It will give you that. But if you want something that tries to evolve the gameplay loop and style of an SRPG, and have that same wacky fun of Mario, definitely pick up Sparks of Hope. Wargroove is the definition of a spiritual successor to Advance Wars on the GBA. It uses the exact same combat, pixel art, economy, battle screens, and army building systems. And soon after Wargroove 1, we got the sequel Wargroove 2. Wargroove 2 lets you play out 3 different campaigns, each of which has its own unique characters and storyline. The gameplay is pretty much the same as the previous, but that's not necessarily a bad thing. Chucklefish really wanted to give fans of the original game the same thing with more bells and whistles, and sometimes that's just enough to make a player happy. The sequel added a new addition called Conquest Mode. Think of like a roguelite, where you get a small army and you have to survive on a map. Once you survive, a new map will load with a new challenge for you to overcome. Over time, you're not going to be able to continue and your army is going to be destroyed. However, after each map, you'll earn a currency to purchase more units for future runs. It's a real challenge, and if the combat of the game resonates with you, it will be where you spend a lot of your time. The game has a great art style and soundtrack, and you really can't go wrong here as an SRPG fan. Honestly, I just wish that they would give us a physical release so it can sit on my shelf alongside Wargroove 1, but in World of Digital, I suppose we'll just have to go without. Well, there you have it, 7 of my favorite SRPG tactics games on the Nintendo Switch. Of course, there are many more to discuss. Tactics Ogre Reborn, Into the Breach, and more. However, I wanted to discuss a few of my favorites for now. If you want another list like this, let me know. I plan on releasing the list of my favorite first-person dungeon crawlers next, so if you're a fan of that genre, stick around. Remember, if you enjoy the content, do me a huge favor and drop a like and sub. And until next time, I hope you have a great day.